So in this video, we're going to go over the product rule. We use the product rule when we're trying to find the derivative of two functions that are being multiplied together that are both differentiable. So if you look at this here, let's say we have a function of f of x times a function of g of x, and both of these functions are differentiable. We can use this formula down here. So let's say that the function of f of x is function 1, and the function of g of x is function 2. In this formula, essentially, we'll just take our first term and then multiply it by the derivative of the second term, and then we add the function of the second term that's being multiplied by the derivative of the first term. So if you look at our first example here, we have a function of x where the square root of x is multiplied by the sine of x. As you can see, we have two different functions here. So we'll go ahead and label the first one, our square root of x here, 1, and then the sine of x as 2. So just kind of using our formula down here, we can find this derivative. So we just list our first term, which is just the square root of x, and then we're going to multiply that by the derivative of the second term, which in this case is the sine of x. And then, as we know, our derivative of sine of x is just the cosine of x, so we write cosine of x here. And this is going to be the first half of our product rule. Now for the second half, we start off by just writing the second function, which is just the sine of x. And then we multiply that by finding the derivative of the first function. So, as you may recall, square root of x is equivalent to x to the 1/2 power. So, finding the derivative of that is just 1/2 x to the negative 1/2 power. So we'll just multiply that by 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. And that's going to be the second half of our product rule right there. Looking at our second example here, as you can see, we also have two functions being multiplied together. Our first one is this 4x cubed minus 7x, and our second term is this cosine of x. So we'll just go down the line of our product rule again. So it always just starts off with our first term, and we're doing nothing with that. And that's going to be multiplied by the derivative of our second term here. So the derivative of the cosine of x is just negative sine of x. And then we add that to, so for the second half of our product rule, our second function is just left alone this time. So that's just going to be the cosine of x. And then that's going to be multiplied by the derivative of our first term, which is here. So the derivative of 4x cubed minus 7x is going to be 12x squared minus 7. And that's going to be our answer for the second one. Now for our third example here. Once again, we have two functions that are being multiplied together. So we'll call this our first one, and then we'll call this our second function. So with the product rule, we just write down our first function. Now we're going to multiply that by the derivative of our second function, which would be negative 2x to the negative third. And then since we have a negative 3 being multiplied by this negative 2 constant here, that gives us a positive 6x to the negative fourth. then for our second half, we just start off by writing our second function. And then multiplying that by the derivative of our first function here. So we get 2x minus 1. And depending on what your teacher wants, you may have to distribute this and then reduce it down, but that's just pretty much just all algebra. Essentially, this is the format of what the product rule requires. So we'll just leave it as is for this example. So yeah, when using the product rule, or if you see two functions that are multiplied together and that can be derived, just know that you're going to have to use the product rule for those, and then just work your way down the line. Annotate what your first function is, and then annotate what your second function is, and then just start off by writing your first function without doing anything to it, and then multiplying that by the derivative of your second function, and then just starting the process over. Since you found the derivative of your second function in the first half, now you know that you don't have to do it for the second half. So the second part, you just write your second function and then multiply that by the derivative of your first function.